So, welcome everybody. My name's Kim Macleod from Indie Authors World, and I am absolutely delighted that tonight I'm getting to talk to the very lovely and very talented Mr. Stuart Nisbet. So welcome, Stuart.
Hi.
And tonight we're going to be talking about his book. Here we are, the book of Here and There. And it's just out. Here we are, hot off the presses. So we're going to be talking about the story, a little bit about behind the story, and getting to know all the good stuff from Stuart. So as I said, if you've got a question that you would like to ask, by all means put it in the chat facility and we will try and get round to your question too. So as we start, I'm going to just read you the blurb for the book so you know what it's about. So the hidden story of slavery is uncovered. Close, I am close to the end of a story, of a life. Under the orange light of the oil lamp, I open my final ledger at a blank page. I trim the nib of my quill, dip it in the ink, and start to write. A bundle of scrolls is unearthed from beneath a city street, the life story of an enslaved scribe, Cato. One piece in the jigsaw of a detective trio, which turns the lives of proud Glaswegian Hamish and Bristolian Jenny upside down. They embark on a secret quest left by Hamish's missing grandpa to finish the story of the origins of his beloved city of Glasgow. The quest leads them via Bristol to the Caribbean as they follow a shocking story of heartbreak and inhumanity that challenges their own identities. So what do you do when everything you believe in is turned upside down? When the story of your city is not what it seems? There you are. And everybody's interested already then. They're all... I love it when you see them leaning forward to their screens to find out more. So just before we start, I want to just read a little bit about Stuart's bio for anybody who doesn't know him. Hopefully we've got some of your friends and family kind of here tonight as well. But Stuart... this is a bit like This Is Your Life, isn't it, when I'm reading the story of you? Stuart Nisbet is an engineer by occupation and a historian by inclination. Although his first degree is in engineering, he completed a PhD in the 18th century Scottish history as a mature student. He's published widely even, on mills, merchants and slavery, and held honorary fellowships at 3 Scottish universities. In his retirement, he's been employed as a history tutor and a tour guide, and this is his first novel. That's all I'm going to tell them, because there's a bit more we're obviously going to be talking about tonight then. So, first of all, how does it feel then, Stuart, to have your first novel out?
It's actually very scary to think that all these people out there are reading it, and I'm waiting to find out if it's any good or not. I've had some good reviews already, so it's encouraging. Yep.
That's always a good sign when you get some good reviews early on, because it is scary for people. I think that's it. Putting any book out there in the world is a kind of scary thing for lots of folk. So so well done. Congratulations on getting the book out. Look at that. The cover's really kind of enticing you in then to the world of the book of Here and There. So we've got a few questions that we're going to get us kind of started. And the first one was, what was it that sparked your interest in writing this story?
I guess it was part of my history interest. I searched through the Glasgow press. This is a long time ago. And as an aside to what I was doing, I turned up all these adverts for escaped Africans who'd escaped from Glasgow merchants, Glasgow landowners' houses, and there was rewards offered for them. And it wasn't what I was looking for, but it was just something that suddenly made me think a bit about, not so much about slavery, but about these Africans who were actually in Glasgow, in the Glasgow area. And I was wondering what life was like for them. And that kind of triggered a vague idea a long time ago to maybe look further into this.
And like you said, it's not something that I had been aware of at all. Until working alongside yourself and reading the book and finding out about these adverts that were placed, because they'd gone AWOL, so that was it. And they were valuable then to these sort of merchants and people who still actually owned them.
Yeah, they offered a reward for them in the press. quite a lot of money to get them back. Yeah, and I think it's hard to know whether they were servants or whether they were slaves. You know, in Scotland, in theory, slavery was outlawed, but I don't know how well they were treated. So you always wonder about that.
Yeah, and I suppose when you're then offering a reward for something, that would kind of entice people to kind of lean towards the ownership, isn't it? Then, you know, just
very much so, yeah.
Because if you were, you know, even if you were a servant, I suppose you could leave and go to work in another household.
Yeah.
So it does open the door a little to like I say, to some stuff that perhaps was hidden then.
Yeah.
And what was going on. So Cato is obviously what it said, this enslaved scribe that you have in your book. So who was Cato? I mean, was he real? Is he just a made up character for you, or how did Cato come about?
Cato's real. He's one of these Africans who escaped from his master's house in 1748, and he stuck out amongst all the others. He stuck out because his owner owned my local park. He owned Lynn Park, which is one of Glasgow's biggest parks. And that to me was a local connection. Obviously slavery, it goes way, way across the Atlantic. But for me, this was, again, I was asking, you know, what was life like for this guy here? And also at the same time with a friend, we researched a country house, a National Trust property on the south of Glasgow. And we wrote this book on Greenbank Estate. And we found the same thing there. The owner there, Robert Allison, he owned an African boy, Negro John. This was in Mearns, south of Glasgow. And to me, this was something worth chasing. At that time, it was only a vague idea to actually chase this a bit further. But it was very much a personal thing and a local thing rather than some kind of abstract thing about slavery.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing, that real local connection, you know, is the bit that kind of gets me. I mean, I remember I think one of the kind of first discussions that you and I had, you know, we were talking about, you know, places that are nearby here, and you know, we're in Largs, kind of Europe and kind of Renfrewshire, so that idea of just what the history that's there but is not really there, because it's not, so, you know, it has been kind of hidden behind the scenes a little. So when you come up with something that's then really connected, it really must have kind of sparked that interest, and it got me curious as well.
So gradually I began chasing after this merchant who owned this Cato. And in the novel I call him Billy. That's just a kind of pet name for him in a novel, but he is an actual character in real life. So I started chasing him. As I mentioned, he owned a Glasgow park, but he also owned like a huge part of Lochwinnoch. And I also wrote this other book more recently when I was chasing him.
Castle Semple.
Castle Semple. This merchant owned this as well, and he owned major properties in Glasgow. He owned the Sheffield Mansion, etc. So he was a major figure in Glasgow. And I began chasing him. In the background, there was this issue that he owned enslaved people. But if you looked at all the big, thick, chunky Glasgow books, like this one, it tells you all about this merchant Billy, and it says he was a soldier, he was a colonel in the army, and through a big romantic marriage, he married an heiress, and he came back and he turned into Glasgow's greatest merchant. And I think we take things with a pinch of salt from these big books, these big Victorian books, as to whether they're true or not. But every single Glasgow book mentions this guy and this tradition of him being a soldier. Nothing to do with slavery, he was a merchant. But I began to get very curious, particularly at Castle Semple, about his wealth. He had a massive estate there that covered most of the parish. He was a major figure in Glasgow. He was a kind of, almost like a founder of Glasgow, someone that like turned Glasgow from a town into a city. So I began to chase him, and that was sort of working up towards this novel, and I began publishing a lot of history about this guy and about others, and beginning to expose them as slave owners.
And how did that go down then?
Well, I suppose that's one of the things in the book about how you deal with this. I've done lots of talks and walks, and the way people react to it it goes through a whole spectrum of reactions. Some folk just don't want to know about it.
Mm-hmm.
Some folk are quite cool with it, and there's all kinds of different emotions in between.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's one of the reasons behind the book, where I was trying to write not so much a historical novel, but a novel about how in modern times we deal with slavery. If we read about it and we uncover it, like I've uncovered it, how do you deal with it? You know, so.
Because what you have, I mean, obviously you've got then, that's Grandpa's quest. Then that was that kind of uncovering the origins.
Yeah.
Grandpa was really kind of following the your story that you'd been uncovering. Then he was and your novel he was doing that. But then to make it that little bit more interesting, I suppose really Grandpa disappears. And you've got then sort of Hamish and Jenny then sort of pick up the mantle, and the story develops even further. So where does the story take them then, I suppose, and how much of that was still following on from you?
Well, Hamish is very much a Glaswegian like myself, and he's reluctant to turn up anything nasty or anything dodgy about the city. So he's chasing this Billy guy on behalf of his grandpa. Mm-hmm. To finish off his missing grandpa's quest. In the background, Jenny, who's from Bristol, she's actually Hamish's cousin, although they're not blood relations. They have a lot of conflict, and they do have a slightly romantic relationship. They're not blood cousins. Jenny, in the background, she uncovers Cato's diaries, Cato's life story, and she starts transcribing that. So in the background, you've got the classic novelistic situation as to who do you believe. Mm-hmm. Hamish is turning up the story that he's maybe wanting to bury. Jenny's turning up the story about this African who was the slave of the guy that Hamish is chasing. Mm-hmm. I don't want to say too much about the plot, about what happens.
No, because you have to buy the book to know it all, that's
it. Yeah, but I think you asked earlier about whether Cato was real or not, and I've already mentioned that he escaped from Billy, so he was a personal slave of Billy. So he was a real character. He was brought to Glasgow. I suppose as a personal slave, he followed Billy around. Mm-hmm. So he knew what Billy was doing. So in a way, in the book, Cato tells Billy's story. Maybe the truth of Billy's story, what Billy would not want to reveal about himself. And in doing so, because Cato's Billy's kind of right-hand man, his right-hand slave, if you like, he's telling his own story as well.
Yeah.
So that's happening in the background, and the whole book follows through as to how Hamish and Jenny react to that and what happens in the end, how they deal with the whole thing. Yeah. When it turns out that this Billy guy is a major slave owner.
And I think one of the things for me that's interesting in how you've told the story is that you do have Cato's voice. So you have his, let's say, you've got his voice because you've got his journal, his own writing, like speaking at the same time. So you've got this historical voice speaking in a modern novel. Whilst so it's almost like you've got those two kind of worlds and those two stories kind of like running side by side. How tricky was it, maybe even thinking about that, as you said you'd been writing this book for quite some time, in a novel, to try and combine the stories then, because doing that from a history perspective but in modern times, what were your challenges maybe in doing that?
It's very difficult. My ambition was always to write something different. I didn't want to write a traditional historical novel. It is a historical novel in a way, but it's not set in the past. Mm-hmm. There's lots of historical novels that cover slavery in the background. There's Andrea Levy's Long Song, and there's lots of media films, 12 Years a Slave, all these things that we've seen in the past 10 or 20 years that try to recreate the slavery period. But I was interested in looking at how we react to the thing. Mm-hmm. So that was why I'm writing it from a modern perspective, and hopefully I've had good feedback and that's worked in a way. I didn't know whether it was going to work. That's one of the issues. So it's really about how we react to slavery, and also as I've hinted, I've published a lot on slavery. I've published a lot about this guy Billy, and I've published a lot of stuff exposing Scots as slavers. Mm-hmm. But although they're exposed, they still get all the attention, and the enslaved majority get no attention, or it seems that they're invisible. But hopefully in this book it shows that they're not invisible, and I've demonstrated that Cato's got a story.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what you've done really well, because you've given, like I said, you've given him a voice. And the other thing, because you know, the other, you know, I suppose books or TV shows and things, and you think about Roots, you know, as the, you know, that kind of thing that came up, you know, when I was, you know, quite young, so it's obviously a long time ago, when Roots was on TV, and that was the first time I think that I'd kind of seen anything where you were really getting what it was like, you know, they were actually taking a step into what it was like to be, you know, to be a slave, and to, you know, to have their voice kind of shared. So I think to be able to do it the way that you have done, and keep that modern detail, because otherwise it could be difficult for to engage a lot of people if they're not into historical novels, but to set this quest and this bit of a detective story going on, hopefully, like I said, it hopefully gives you a new audience to then have that perspective. So so I do think you've done a good job at actually being able to bring both sides of that together.
I think one of the problems is that most people tend to think they know all about slavery, and whether that's true or not, but Scotland is quite different from England, but there's just as big an issue as to how we deal with it, how we react to it. You know, if we do know that's a terrible, terrible thing, how do we react to it? What do we do with it? You know, do we just accept it? Is it now part of Scottish history? Some folk will argue that it's not. You know, why did we not know about it earlier? There's all kinds of, I've heard every excuse in the book about why you should ignore it. And I really didn't want to get into that. I was just going to, the book's not a book, it's not a textbook about slavery. It's a story about how people react to it.
And it's also, there's also a physical journey that they go off, because you can see, so we've got Bristol and we've got Glasgow, but we've also, as you can see from the cover of the book as well, there's a hint of something. And yeah, we do have palm trees and largs, but it's the, you know, they're going beyond largs. So where else do they actually meander off to?
I think that was the big breakthrough, was going to the Caribbean. I've always been interested in visiting the places that I'm researching, but that's a bit extreme to go to the Caribbean. But to me, that was the solution to the whole thing. It was really only when I decided to do that and I went there that I turned up most of the evidence. And it was also a very personal journey to see so much Glasgow stuff there, to be in this exotic island that we tend to think of as a holiday paradise, and find all this, I don't mean dark stuff, I just mean lots of Scottish stuff, Glasgow names, Glasgow places. I could give you one example that we went on a day trip from one island to the next. We're on an island called St Kitts, and we crossed on the ferry to Nevis, which is about 2 miles away. And we booked a personal trip. And the lady guide, obviously a black lady, she was standing on the quayside holding up a piece of cardboard with our name on it, Nisbet. And we got off the boat, and this lady goes, "Hello, I'm Mrs. Nisbet." And my wife goes, "No, I'm Mrs. Nisbet." And they started sort of not arguing, but it's that way where you don't want to try and imply that local people are stupid, you know. But we let it rest until lunchtime. So I said to her, "Your surname's the same as us, it's Nisbet." She said, "Yes. At the abolition of slavery, we had no names. So we took the name of our Scottish masters." And I just about, what a coincidence to go there, find a lady with our Scottish surname, and then she took us to Nisbet Plantation, which is now a holiday resort, but it's a sugar plantation called Nisbet Plantation. And that was just all pure chance. But it was an example of the connections there that are very personal.
Yeah. I mean, that must have been quite, like I say, quite a surreal experience then, you know, just, and especially when you're interested and stuff. So did you know that there was a kind of Nisbet plantation there before you went?
No, I mean, there's lots of Scottish named plantations there, but I didn't know that,
So hence
that appears in the book as well, but not under Nisbet. It's a similar scene appears in the book. So a lot of the stuff is quite personal. It's followed my own detective trail, as you've said.
Yeah. I think that probably, you know, I talked to a lot of writers who have done various bits of research, you know, for their books. I think that's probably the furthest I've heard somebody get to, just to go and do some research. Because most people nowadays, I know when Sinclair, because my husband writes, and he's usually then on Google Maps and kind of looking at stuff. So when I get now giving him permission then to kind of go off to wherever it is he's wanting to go to, then to look, say, well, Stuart went to the Caribbean, so yeah, we could all go further.
It kind of went beyond that because I was determined to find the plantations that were owned by this Billy guy.
Yeah.
And it turned out there was quite a few, but it wasn't easy to get to them. Here you would just go off marching up the hillside, dodging the sheep, but there you're in a tropical condition. You can't just wander about. It's too hot. We had to hire guides and we had to hire four-wheel drive vehicles. We eventually got to his plantations, both there and later in Grenada, and that was a really big moment to get there. And it was like the mirror of Castle Semple, but in the Caribbean. Right. Because these were his estates there, just the same as he had Castle Semple and Lynn Park and Glasgow.
So yeah, so that kind of mirrored world, but in a very, very different climate.
Yeah. It wasn't easy to go tramping about.
So it's quite fascinating, I think, that whole that whole experience of getting out, doing all this research, all the stuff that you've written then that was sort of factual, but then to kind of go off into that and write it in a novel and a story and using your imagination. So that also requires it requires a different way of writing as well for you, doesn't it? So did you find that something that you enjoyed, or was it harder to kind of like create the voices and the kind of the novels type story from your other writing?
I think I enjoyed doing it, or I wouldn't have persisted for 10 years, but it's much, much harder than doing a PhD. It's much, much harder than writing factual history. I did lots of creative writing courses, first of all, to get a better idea of what, how to write, because they tell you that one of the worst things you can ever do is try and turn history into a novel. You should never do that. So
you've broken the rules. That's it. You're a rule breaker.
Maybe.
If anybody's got any questions that you want to ask, by all means, again, put them into the chat, and we'll sort of come around to you. The other thing I was thinking about was, so you've got obviously Glasgow and Bristol. Are they? I mean, there's similarities between the cities.
That connection fascinated me. I mean, you wouldn't normally think of Bristol having any Glasgow connections, but the thing about Bristol is it started very, very much the same as Glasgow. They deepened the river. It became a big transatlantic port. Bristol, it didn't turn into a big industrial city like Glasgow. And the benefit of that is you've still got all the Georgian buildings in Bristol. So what I feel is that you can go to Bristol and you can almost see Glasgow 200 years ago. Because it's still got all the merchants' houses. And also gradually, I mean, I visited Bristol a lot. My niece lived there as well at the time, and it was fascinating for me to go there, and I actually found out that this Billy guy owned 3 properties in Bristol. And again, we tend to think of these guys as just being Scottish. Okay, they're dealing with the Caribbean, but they were dealing with everywhere. He had contacts in London, and he had 3 houses in Bristol. So that was part of the discovery process, going all over the place, going to all these different places. Yeah.
So I suppose that's what I said as well. So you can understand then when these Victorian tomes are being written that they wouldn't want to have any bad light shown against, these sort of guys as being, because here they were, wealthy landowners, had kind of done an awful lot of work in their own cities, that they wouldn't want any of this stuff that was potentially going to tarnish them, showing then.
So. No, I mean, they also, they're the guys who controlled the books that went out. They were the guys who put up the statues. The other obvious connection with Bristol is Edward Colston, who was chucked in the harbour a couple of years ago. This Billy guy that I chased is very, very similar to him. Yeah. Almost like one of the major figures in the city.
Yeah.
There's various questions coming up there, but I couldn't quite
we've got a couple of questions.
Somebody asked what was the most difficult part and what was the best part.
Yeah. So what was the most difficult part to write then? What did you most enjoy about writing?
What kept me going was Cato's voice. That came to me quite early on, and that kind of kept me going.
Yeah.
Most difficult is probably just to get the characters right and get the story sorted. Make sure it all works, which you helped with as well.
Because I mean, yeah, I mean that is a task when you're trying to kind of pick through a storyline and kind of make people real, you know, so it's there. Helen's also asked, did you feel shocked by anything that you discovered during your research?
Very much so. When you do write history, you try and be unemotional, if you like. You don't. If you're writing history articles, it's very much not an emotional thing, but it is shocking. The whole thing is shocking. Basically, you have nightmares about some of the stuff you read, and it's very difficult. You've almost got to shield the reader from that, not put too much of that in, because again, it repels people, at least initially.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And again, perhaps a novel's a better way of approaching it and not going too much into the dark stuff. There is dark stuff in the book, yeah. And it's a very dark subject, but the big question is how we react to it. And if you get hit with too much dark stuff at the start, you will rebound. Mm-hmm. So it's hard to know how to pitch it at people, if you like.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, I mean, you look at some of the films and things that have been made, and some are very, very hard hitting because it's just in your face, and it's like, oh wow. And I mean, you know, I've watched some and kind of felt, you know, like physically, you know, like you know, you feel it physically having watched something, you know, about how terrible that was. Yeah. And does something like that help change people more than an insight into an individual character and you know, with all the other stuff, you know? So yeah.
It's also the issue of dealing with these huge numbers.
Mm-hmm,
it's like other terrible events in history where there was millions of victims. And again, I think perhaps a novel with a story about one person helps bring it home to people, because you can't deal with thousands of victims. You can only deal with the story of one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So Jill's asked, why did you decide not to reveal Billy's real name, perhaps even in an author's note? Because she wasn't sure if he was a real person, but I know now from your factual articles that he is.
I suppose that's just part of a novel. You don't want to. It's totally fiction. You know, you've made it up, although it's based on fact. And I've had to separate fact from fiction. I've given the clues. Mm-hmm. You know, people will quite quickly realise that it's the same person, but it's a novel.
But what we also want you to do is to buy the novel, then go and buy all the other books that Stuart's published that are factual, so that you then want to try and make up the bits behind the scenes and see if they can connect the dots. That would be a publisher's response. Ian Brodie. Ian has said the book is excellent. Thank you. We do agree, Stuart, don't we? It took me a while to get used to its style, but when it's well worth persevering. Where did you get the inspiration for Hamish and Jenny and the kind of relationship that they developed?
That developed slowly. Initially, I only had Hamish. Then I decided to have it's always good to have two sparring partners, two people that are in conflict, if you like. It's a better way of covering a story rather than just one person telling a story. Mm-hmm. You can bounce ideas off two different people. So we've got three characters. We've got Hamish and we've got Jenny. Then in the background, we've got Cato in the story. Plus we've got Billy as well, but Cato's telling Billy's story, if you like. Yeah. The other big breakthrough for me in writing the factual stuff was that I found Billy's letters, his personal letters. And that gave me a huge insight into what he was really doing, not what I found in the Glasgow books. Mm-hmm. But when I first turned up his letters, the first letter I turned up, it said, I spent 11 years training as an overseer on Colonel Smith's plantation, and I had many indifferent Negroes. Mm-hmm. It turned out instead of being a colonel in the army, he went out age 17 as a slave overseer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a total upturn of the Glasgow history books. And that was a shock as well, finding that it's such a different story.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a kind of almost that, you know, well, the Disneyfy it from we'll have the nice shiny one over here that we've had, and then you kind of delve behind the real story, and it's like, oh wow, there's a lot more to it. Kevin's asked, he said that Cato's voice is very distinctive. How did you establish his voice then, and what sources did you use?
I think initially from meeting people on the islands. It's a very difficult thing for a white person to try and pretend to be a black person or write a black person's voice. It could be regarded as being racist almost. So it was a difficult thing to do. So it was based on people I met and also one or two books that were written in the 1950s where folk in the Caribbean wrote in their own voice instead of in a kind of standard English BBC voice.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, how do you know how an African man spoke in the 1700s who was learned English from a Scot, kind of, was mixed in with Africans from all different countries. Most of the folk in the island were from Bristol, so the Scots probably had to pretend they weren't Scots. It's very difficult, but you just got to try and make up something that's convincing to yourself, I suppose.
Yeah, and then try and hold the consistency of that, is what you said. So I mean, I think it's probably like, if anybody's writing a novel, actually understanding who your characters are and how they speak regardless. So like Hamish obviously has a different, his voice and how he speaks and how he would react is different from Jenny, and how she would speak and how she would react. And the same way, like, I suppose the challenge for Cato, as they said, that he was, from a different time, so you were having to really kind of use more of your imagination as well as your experience. And how much of Hamish and Jenny did you actually get to feel that you really knew their characters as well as were they as close to you as Cato was? Or
that's a bit scary, because several people have told me that Hamish is me. Although he's a bit younger. I think that's always the case in a novel. You're exposing yourself very much. Jenny, I don't know. Jenny just developed gradually. At first, she wasn't an actual character. She was just a voice in the background. But again, as you say, I was wanting to play off two people against each other. There's quite a lot of Glasgow-Bristol rivalry that goes on in quite a light-hearted way in the book. Because there obviously is rivalry there between the cities. Glasgow became much bigger, and yet Bristol is maybe a more cultured place. I don't know, but there's a lot of potential there.
And the one character that kind of starts all this off is the one that we don't really know an awful lot about, and that's Grandpa.
Yes.
So, and we're not going to tell you about what happens with Grandpa. If you've not read the book or what's going on or where Grandpa is, then you need to read the book to find out. But that, I thought that was also an interesting way. So what you have is Billy and Jenny also looking for, where is this? And there was lots of clues of things came to them, and you're going, what's happening? Where's Grandpa? Where's Grandpa? So,
again, he's probably me to a certain extent. He's got the same interests as me in chasing after the city origins and stuff. So it's a bit embarrassing. Again, I'm exposing myself.
That's it. We never told you. Then you come on here and you give away all your life secrets. That's what it is. So I don't know if we've got. We're going to get you to read an excerpt of the book of Here and There, and share some a bit of that. And if there's anybody else still got questions, by all means put them in the chat, and we'll pick up on them after Stuart's sort of finished reading. So if you want to tell us just a little bit about where you're going to read from, and just to give people a bit of context, I suppose, about.
I'm going to read a shorter bit than I proposed. I don't want to bore people too much.
I'm sure they won't be bored.
Basically, Hamish has come home to the family tenement flat in Glasgow to look for his grandpa. His grandpa is also called Murdo, and when he goes there, he meets his grandpa's friend Archie. So that's the kind of background to it.
Okay.
I'm brought back to the present by footsteps shuffling up the stone stairs. I hope they'll stop on the floor below, but they continue up. Is it Mary? A voice echoes in the close. You'll be wanting these. A tall man with white hair and a ponytail comes into view. He's wearing a dark suit, black shirt and red braces. From his mouth hangs an unlit fag. He holds a bunch of keys. I smile. Archie! Archie's tall, thin and narrow-jawed. His pale blue eyes sparkle behind silver-rimmed spectacles. I grab my pannier and take the keys. I select the biggest key and unlock the storm doors. Then, instead of opening the main door to the old family flat, we step into the lobby and close the storm doors behind us. Then we turn to face the secret door in the side wall. I select a smaller key and put it in the lock. Out in the close, a door bangs and we hear footsteps. Quick, says Archie. I turn the key and open the narrow door. Archie follows, switches on the stair light and closes the door. He raises a finger to his mouth. Shh. We wait in the darkness, but the footsteps recede. Archie snibs the door and leads the way up the narrow wooden stair. On the small landing at the top, light spills through the mottled glass door onto a brass sphinx on the wee hall table. I run my finger along the old sign in the middle of the door, caretaker. I hesitate, but there's no sign of Murdo. The room's dim and the curtains are closed. Archie's panting from the effort of climbing the stairs. Need a fag to get my breath back. We stumble through the gloom to the spiral stair in the centre of the room. I lead the way up to the roof light in the big dome with Archie shuffling behind. Our feet clang on the iron steps. As we reach the mezzanine level, I glance at Murdo's big bed, half expecting him to be lying there. Archie sits down for a rest on the edge of the bed. At the top of the stair, I slide the bolt and turn the handle. The wee door opens with a loud crack. Pigeons flap noisily from the parapet. The circular platform's hardly big enough to swing a cat. I turn and give Archie a hand. He straightens up and shades his eyes. Best view in Glasgow, he wheezes. Just a minute. I climb back down and fetch 2 folding chairs. Side by side, we look out at the roofs and towers of the merchant city. It takes Archie a few minutes to get his breath back. He loved it up here, I say. Where he got all his daft ideas, Archie says, through a cloud of smoke. Where can he be? Archie turns to face me. He sent you anything recently? Like what? A roll of papers or anything? I shrug. Turned up something dodgy about the city, Archie says. Aki's always chasing new stuff. Some things are better left buried. Archie stands up and waves his fag hand in the air, scattering ash. Some of us are tasked with protecting the city's image. He looks like Gandalf, dispensing wisdom from the top of his tower. He grips my shoulder with a bony hand. If you find I'm always bugging him, come to me first. It's not a suggestion, it's an order. Archie's involved in some of the city's oldest clubs and societies, remnants of trade associations and gentlemen's clubs, powerful groups with fingers in many pies. Some say they still run the city. Murdo takes all the charity dinners and shenanigans with a pinch of salt and always winds up Archie about it. Sometimes he goes too far and they don't speak for ages. We sit in silence, looking out over the roofscape. After several more fags, Archie says, "It's making me dizzy. Just remember, come to me first."
Well done. Thank you very much. That was great. I'm just going to pin myself back onto the... Oh, there we are. Come back. So moved and let you have the stage all to yourself there. So well done. That was great. Andrew said he notices that Hamish collects bricks. Is there any connection?
Andrew knows fine that I collect bricks. I've got a collection in my garden that have names on them. Yes. A loaded question.
I was going to say that sounds. See, if you were writing another sort of crime novel, that could a whole different kind of. You could take that in a different route, then, don't you? That person's name's on that brick.
Yeah. Again, it's a sign that I'm in the book, unfortunately.
That's it. So those who know will actually will see you in there. That's the reality, isn't it? Nikki's posted up the link for the Amazon books. If anybody doesn't have it yet, then you can click the link on the chat to go and get a copy of. Here we have the book of Here and There. We're also going to share your website and your Facebook page, your author's Facebook page, because as we know, getting started, you can write the best book ever, but what we really need people's help with is to share it out and let other people know about it. And that's a challenge for everybody, regardless of when what sort of book that you publish. So if you can sort of share the love and actually, can I share Stuart's Facebook page, and because you're writing little bits on that and giving little snippets of the history and amongst your Facebook stuff that you've been doing.
Get the reviews out there. Thank you to those who put reviews on Amazon already. That's a great help.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that way you can really help a writer, give them some reviews and share the stuff out to your books, just to people that you think might be interested and would enjoy it. So is there any more questions? Anything else we've got? Oh yes, we've got one here. So Kevin has said, what was the journey to getting it published? Did Stuart try bigger publishers?
That's a funny story, because as I was telling Kim a couple of days ago, a year ago just now, I went round all the Scottish publishers that I thought would be potentially interested, and all the agents, and it's well known that they don't even reply to you. One was slightly interested. Another one came back to me 2 days ago and said I'd now gone into the second stage of considering my book. So it was quite. I was quite happy to tell them that it was now published, and I published it myself. But yeah, it's quite a difficult task, but it's been helped greatly by Kim and her organisation.
Thank you, and that's just what we've been doing for over 10 years now, just helping writers who're choosing to take ownership of your book for yourself. And I think that is the difference, Stuart. It's like, lots of people can wait on a publisher in their timeline, but when you know that you've spent a lot of time and effort yourself and you want that book out, then that's the way to do it, is just to kind of go, right, that's it, it's going, and now we're glad that it's here. So you can send them a copy and say, see what you could have won. What was that quiz? There was a quiz show. What was that they used to do? Was it the Golden Shot or something? Here's what you could have won. Don't know. Showing my age now. There you are. Answers in the chat if anybody can tell me what quiz show that was. We'll send you a copy of the book if anybody can tell us.
That is a big thing to get it out there, because I think there's a point where you could actually just dump it all. It goes on for so long, and it's just this issue of whether you don't actually know whether it's any good or not until it's out there. So
yeah. And often, I think that's the thing, is that Helen said it was bullseye. There we go. That is often the challenge, I think, that a lot of writers have, is that, is my book good enough? And by going to a publisher, there's this, I suppose that's that you've got an independent body of somebody looking at it and deciding not even so much whether your book actually fits with their business model and what they're trying to do. And that's the challenge, I think, for lots of people to realise that you could have written a really, really good book, but just because a publisher doesn't want it doesn't mean that it doesn't have an audience, or that it's not worth, putting out there for people to read. So I just want to say congratulations, Stuart. I think, you've done a great job. You had a vision of what you wanted to do. We're delighted that we were able to help you, get to this point, get the book, and get it in your hand, when you actually can hold it and physically see it has been great. And what I'd like to do with all of you who are on the call, if you can, unmute yourselves. And there'll be a little bit of noise, and we can actually all give Stuart a big cheer and a clap and say congratulations to him, because it's what we would do if we were in the hall. So yeah, everybody's now trying to figure out how they unmute themselves. There we go. That's it. We'll let there'll be a little button on. That's it. We're finding folk. I think if we're all sat unmuted, then can we give everybody a big cheer and say congratulations, Stuart? Hey! Thank you so much. So there we go. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll just stop the recording.